I have visited South Africa numerous times over the years, and in the Western Cape and Northern Cape, you often get a delicious herbal tea, which they call Rooibos, which means red bush, and it's sometimes just known as African red tea in the U.S. It's very good to drink, but they also often in shops will have locally handmade soaps that have been made with that tea, often with the grounds included to give some exfoliation to the soap. So when I came home one time, I decided I'm going to learn how to do this, because I knew you could buy Rooibos in American grocery stores. This one from Twinings is available right now in most Florida grocery stores. I've also seen other brands available. And so that's what I'm going to be using, both for color. I'm going to use brewed tea as my liquid for the lye, and then I'm also going to use it for exfoliation by putting the grounds into the soap. I've made Rooibos soap several times, and one thing I've discovered is that while you can get really good color from the brewed tea, the delicious fragrance that it has disappears almost immediately when you add lye to it. So I am using a fragrance oil. Fortunately, the fragrance oils that are out there are quite good in duplicating the actual smell of good Rooibos tea. The instructions on the tea bags say to brew it for 4 minutes for drinking. I actually tend to put the tea bags in and just let them sit there until the tea gets cold. The idea being that I want to extract as much color as I possibly can, and who cares what it tastes like, it's going in the soap. This is the recipe I plan to use, with some castor oil for bubbliness, coconut oil and palm kernel oil for cleansing, regular palm oil, which will give it some hardness, shea butter, which is good for your skin, and sunflower oil, which is very high in oleic acid, so that's also good conditioning. High oleic sunflower oil actually has more oleic acid in it than regular olive oil has. The palm oil and palm kernel oil flakes are both RSPO certified sustainable. I also plan to use some sugar and some sodium lactate, the sugar for bubbliness, the sodium lactate to make it a bit harder. And then Rooibos fragrance oil. This is from Rustic Essentials. I've also bought it from thesage.com, and they both make a very nice one. And then I'll be coloring the soap, and also for exfoliation using the grounds out of 6 actual Rooibos tea bags. These are the grounds that I've taken out of 6 Rooibos tea bags. So what I did, I weighed the water that I needed and brought it to a boil, and then I brewed the tea bags in it as if I were making tea. And while it was still hot, I added the sugar, and then I just set that aside and let it cool, and took the tea bags out and dumped the wet grounds here in this bowl, which is where I'm going to mix my oils. And then to that remaining solution, I re-weighed it. It weighed less at that point because these grounds had picked up some of the water weight. So I brought the liquid back up to the desired amount of water for the recipe, and then added my sodium hydroxide lye to that. And so it's now cooling again, but this bowl is ready now to have the oils added to it. Okay, I have added the sodium lactate to the lye water. It's at about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. My oils are at about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. This is should be a fairly slow-moving recipe anyway. So, and I'm not doing any pattern, so I don't really care how fast it traces. So I'm going to mix these now. As I may have said in a previous video, and as you can see if you look at my old videos, I used to use a stick blender all the time, which speeds up bringing the soap to a good emulsion or trace. But my technique with that was apparently not very good, because I always ended up with bubbles in the soap. So I've kind of gone back to using a hand whisk. And sometimes it takes longer, but I like the results. So that's what I'm doing this time, just hand whisking it. And if this takes too long, I will speed up or edit the video so you don't have to watch me stirring for 20 minutes. When I pour this, I want it to be thick enough that the particles of the ground up tea leaves don't float or sink. I want them to stay pretty much where they were, so it's uniform throughout. So that may not be really a very thick trace, but at least we need a little bit of thickness there, a little bit of viscosity. I have been told by old soap makers that there's some rule that you always have to stir in the same direction. If you switch directions, you'll ruin your soap. Of course, that's ridiculous, and just because my arm gets tired, I switch directions and switch arms all the time and still end up with good soap. And obviously there's no chemical or physical reason that that concept should be true anyway. So who knows who figured that out. This is actually getting a little bit of viscosity to it already, so I may not have to stir it very long. Okay, this is certainly not at trace yet, but it is a very good emulsion, so I think I'm going to not stir it much more. I'll just pour it while it's still really liquid and then let it harden. I'm using the Brambleberry 18 bar mold with a silicone liner, so I will cover it and insulate it, but not really put it in the oven to pop it. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So I'll put the dividers in, and then I'll spray the top with alcohol and cover it with the lid, and then I usually insulate it with old wool sweaters, put several of those over top to insulate it so it'll warm up. But I think that looks pretty good. It is the next morning, and here is the finished soap. It's still a little bit soft, so I'm going to leave it in the mold for a few more hours before I actually unmold it. You can see there the distribution of the grounds of the tea, which will be a good exfoliant. Here are the finished bars out of the mold, but not at all trimmed up. I find it interesting that you get much darker color on the sides that face the plastic mold dividers than you do on the top or bottom surface. The top soap here is a top side, the bottom one is bottom side. And then here is a bar that was against the side of the silicone wall of the mold. So against silicone you get the light color, and then against plastic you get the dark color. I am assuming that eventually everything will fade to the same color. I've seen that happen in the past. In fact, I made some a few days ago that the surfaces, which were lighter like these, they're not as dark yet as the sides that were facing the dividers, but they are a bunch darker than these are. So I think that's probably the direction it will go.